This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Glynn Tonsor, K-State livestock economist, starts this week's shows with a cattle market outlook. He reviews the current market as well as a point of how people prepare their beef steaks, pork chops, and chicken breasts at home. K-State soil fertility specialist Dorivar Ruiz Diaz continues the show with why plant analysis is important for corn growers. He explains how sampling can be done and what can influence its results. Ending today's show is Glenn Brunkow, former K-State research and extension agent, discussing what he finds to be valuable when connecting with customers at markets. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Monday show with a cattle market update with K-State livestock economist Glynn Tonsor. Glenn, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Glenn, kicking off our cattle market conversation, what is cash cattle looking like?
Yeah, so AMS called the Fed cattle market on Friday at about 196, continuing the recent trend. That'd be up $5, if not $6 on the week. Pretty strong week. I will note the volume wasn't a lot to speak about, but regardless, we had a nice week there on the quotes. AMS called the Dodge City feeder cattle market steady to $3 higher. Again, kind of depends on the weight class, and here the volumes in particular were quite a bit lower, although seasonally that's not necessarily surprising. One lot I noted was 71 head weighing 882 pounds, came in at 259. So we had a strong uptone in the cash market. When you flip over to the board, so CME, the futures contracts, they closed Friday, August for both live cattle and feeder cattle here. 185 for live cattle, up about $2 on the week, and then feeder cattle 260, up $1 for the week. I'll pause there. We don't always have quote-unquote perfect alignment between cash and futures, in the short term at least. I do think they're connected in the bigger picture, but in the short term, sometimes you can have 1 week one way or the other. Everything was up this past week, so that's nice and easy to explain. And continued up, that's what most of the cattle market people have been thinking? You got to give me a time duration when you ask that. No, not up forever. But here in the short term, yes. It feels like we've turned the corner a little bit on the supply part. So we've had more animals, heavier animals than we thought for a while. Some of that narrative's taken pause, switching to it's raining as you and I are sitting right here. I don't think we've pulled the trigger on expansion, but that's getting talked about a little bit more than maybe I thought it would at this point. Might feel like a little bit of a sidebar, but you and I are doing this right early in July. We normally would be looking forward to the July cattle inventory report to look at that. Past segments, we've talked about that. We're not going to get that. But I'll interject my opinion is I don't think we're having an aggregate pull on herd expansion yet. But the tone of that, right, countryside is kind of growing, and that's consistent with these higher cattle prices. And what about for box beef cutout? So we also had a pull up this past week there as well. Again, sort of perfect alignment, which is nice and easy to explain. Is Choice was up about $4 on the week. Select was up to, I think it was up $2.50 this past week. Probably the last of a holiday effect. Most of the, 4th of July buying would have been before that. We'll see what the actual foot traffic in the restaurants and the grocery stores are. But, the institutional buying would have already been behind that. But the fact that we had all three, box beef, futures, and cash, all up this past week is nice to see. And Glenn always wanted to touch on feedlot returns. And what are we seeing for feedlot returns right now? Yeah, so for a quick reminder for our listeners, you go to AgManager.info monthly. There's like 2 months earlier in this year we missed because of some delays in survey data. But generally every month we put out this net return for Kansas feed yards, kind of a barometer of trends, and it is mapping out, I always interject this, a cash. So if I pay cash for feeders, take cash when I sell them as fed, and I pay cash for corn as I go, what would my returns look like? These were last done, I believe it was on June 18th is the date these are stamped. So they are 2 weeks old. And I'll interject that because the returns have probably improved because the live cattle market has went up. But as of the middle of June, we were looking at positive returns through August. So cattle that left the Kansas feed yards through August would be positive. Specifically July here, $73 and change was the positive return for steers that you and I are looking at. And then those returns turn negative from September out through next February. And the main reason for that is we have more and more money put into the feeder. So the animal coming into the feed yard is getting more expensive, consistent with what we were talking a little bit earlier. And yes, fed cattle prices are expected to go up, but not at the same rate. And our cost of gains are flat, if not a little bit up over that period as well. So when you put all that into any kind of profit or margin calculation, it's starting to squeeze there, the local feed yard. I did want to interject there. There's been at least a $5 improvement per hundredweight in the last 2 weeks in these projections for fed cattle. So if you're selling a 1,400 pounder, you could go in there and add $70 to every one of these to kind of update them. And that gets some of those negatives to closer to break even. But again, these are always changing. So I put these out monthly for a reason, because the main inputs from the production side come in once a month. The market information is constantly updating, and I can update it like I just did right here and say 2 weeks ago is different than now. I hope people find that useful. They can go to AgManager.info, download the full report, download all the assumptions behind it, and kind of track that.
And another report that you always put out on Ag Manager, and taking the time to mention today, the meat demand monitor.
Yeah, so you and I are talking here again, first business day of July, holiday effects being what they are and so forth. I'm hoping that the June MDM report will be posted, probably not by the time folks listen to this, but before the 4th of July. But it's not on Ag Manager quite yet. So hopefully by the time you go to look for it, it will be. If not, it will be shortly after the holiday. It's under review and done. So I want to be careful and not give away like the front end until it's totally done. But I want to jump to what is going to be in the end of that report, because I do think this is timely for, I hope we all are able to pause and catch our breath and spend time with our families here on the 4th of July, hopefully around the barbecue grill. Even better yet, if somebody else is running the barbecue grill for you. But one of the things we asked in June was, what do you do at home for at-home food prep for beef steaks, pork chops, and chicken breasts, because we're trying to learn about the difference across those three major meats. What do you do just to get ready? And the 5 things that we asked, do you usually do these or do you not usually do these? So how prevalent are they? Is, do you intentionally buy a cut with more fat, either on the outside as marbling or inside the cut? And beef steaks, that's much more common. And that's not surprising. About 42% of respondents say, on beefsteaks specifically, yes, I intentionally buy something with more fat. Conversely, it's less than 30% would say yes to that for pork chops and chicken breast. I want to pause right there because the role of marbling is viewed differently in these 3 major meat proteins is the point of that. We also asked, do you let the product sit at room temperature for 30 minutes before you start cooking it? And the prevalence of that is greater for beefsteaks as well. So almost half of our respondents said they did that. More like 40% said they did that on pork chops and chicken breast. All 3 of these major protein products, over 3/4 of folks tell us they add salt, pepper, or some other seasoning. That's probably the easiest, most basic thing, and it's very common. And sort of folks tell us they do that kind of regardless of which of those proteins they're going to throw on the grill. The last thing I'll interject here is adding barbecue sauce or another sauce. It's much more common on chicken breast. So over half the folks said, yes, we do that to our chicken breast. Less than 40% said, yes, we do that to our pork chops and our beef steaks. So I want to pause and back up there for a moment. I know I just threw a lot at everybody. You're going to see this in bar chart form. The numbers will make more sense when you see that later. But what I want to impress on folks is there are some common steps, such as adding salt, pepper, seasoning, kind of no matter what you're going to throw on the grill is the way to think about this. But then there's quite a few important differences beyond that. How folks view fat, right? Is fat good for me, not good for me? Do I want more of it in my meat or not? Do I want it there to add flavor and or, taste profile is different. So we see the interest in that being much higher, right, for beef steaks. And then the role of sauce, maybe to add flavor and or to keep something more moist, is much more prevalent on chicken breast. And, it's not my job here to choose favorites in the meat protein space. We as a country consume a lot of beef steaks, pork chops, and chicken breast. But I'm trying to impress on folks that the at-home efforts to prepare them and make the most of those proteins differ. And I hope folks find, this kind of ad hoc addition in the June MDM helpful. The better we understand what folks are doing at home, the better we can understand the, kind of the reasons why demand differs across these products and ultimately across households, so we can help in this case, the beef and pork checkoff groups that are paying for the project.
And Glenn, I wanted to just put out a reminder, something people can put on their calendar, August 15th to the 16th, K-State's Risk and Profit Conference, and having a presentation there with the Meat Demand Monitor.
Yeah, and what we just got done talking about here, the differences in at-home food prep will be talked about. We're wrapping up the agenda for Risk and Profit, as you alluded to there. So, yes, put that on your calendar, August 15th, 16th. The part of that ties into what we've talked about here is I'm on the docket to give an outlook talk. I usually focus on the beef and cattle markets, but I also have one of the breakout sessions that's focused on the Meat Demand Monitor. And those of you that like to hear those updates, please come spend time with us in that breakout specifically. They're 45, 50 minutes, and I will spend, at least 30 minutes of that kind of overviewing a lot of information that comes from the MDM. Justin Bina is a PhD student wrapping up his time here. He's helped build a dashboard, so a visual aid of taking lots of this in-depth data and turning it into visual, that we can learn from. I'll do some demonstrations of that there, kind of show folks how the state of Kansas is different than California and Texas. I'll pause there for a moment to say, why would we do that if we're from Kansas? Well, we're a net exporter of what we produce in a big way in the beef and pork space, because there's a lot more folks that live outside of Kansas that consume beef and pork than in it. And I use Texas and California as my example as, two of the three most populated states. So understanding what the demand for meat products in those states are is really important, because it has a bigger impact on national demand. And the Meat Demand Monitor lets us do that, is the point. So that's kind of the shout out. Put that on your calendar. We'll do that. Things like these ad hoc questions you and I talked about today, there's several of those we can learn from. The role of inflation, financial sentiment, I've interjected those kind of off and on as I'm on here with you roughly once a month. I'm going to speak to the pattern over time in that. So that connects with today's discussion. Put on your calendar. The last one that's related to this for interest is Jamie Luke, is another PhD student that I have the pleasure to work with. She spent a lot of time in the role of livestock producers in the climate change discussion, which is also quite hot topic and can get politicized. The work she's doing is, we're trying to be emotionless and adding economic insight to that. Specifically, what would feedlot adoption of a 3-NOP product be to mitigate emissions? What would the economics of that need to look like for us to observe adoption? Things like how large a subsidy would have to be for it to be adopted. And then the flip of that is, what would be the consumer willingness to pay, willingness to accept, and those kind of things. Trying to add, as I said, unbiased research insight to that topic to better understand, right, what we might see in the future on that and related products. Jamie's a great student, going to talk about that in her breakout, and that fits into the broader, right, beef cattle space. More generally, beyond that, the plug is most of your listeners are aware of Risk and Profit. It's August 15th and 16th. Please come join us if you're available.
That was K-State livestock economist Glynn Tonsor. I will put links in today's show notes on agtoday.net, where you will be able to find his meat demand monitor and more information on the Risk and Profit Conference. We're cutting to a short break now, but stick around because we have more for you ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our Monday show talking about testing nutrient levels in corn. And to talk about it, we're joined by K-State soil fertility specialist Dorivar Ruiz Diaz. Dorivar, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Dorivar, why is testing nutrients and plant analysis something that's worthwhile for growers to be doing?
Yes, this is one of the main tools we really have for managing nutrients. Of course, soil test is one that we use regularly, but tissue analysis is something that can have great value also for making decisions for fertility management. Some considerations there that we have to keep in mind for tissue analysis. First of all, the how we use tissue analysis is something to think about a little bit. There's really two main objectives. One of them could be what we call diagnostics, where we're trying to find out what kind of problems maybe we have in the field, perhaps some yellowing showing up, and we don't know exactly what it is. That's an opportunity for tissue analysis to identify what could be the issue, especially obviously in the case of nutrient deficiency. Now, the second option for tissue analysis use is really a monitoring tool, which basically is sort of a quality control, if you will. If we're already doing a good job with soil testing, fertility management, but we want to make sure things are where it should be during the growing season, then we can also, even though things are looking okay, we can basically monitor the nutrient levels. And this is also help us in situations where we may have what we call hidden hunger, where we don't have a deficiency symptom really show up, but there may be some nutrients that are maybe getting very low and perhaps affecting yields. And so those are two of the main uses that we have for tissue analysis, and that we can definitely take advantage of that and again, helping with nutrient management.
When it comes to sampling these plants, how does the size change how they need to be sampled?
Yes, that's a key question. Some of the guidelines for tissue analysis, the sampling protocol is something that's very important. If we go back to the first goal of diagnostics, we have a lot more flexibility in that case. If we do have a field that has parts of the field that's showing some yellowing, chlorosis showing up, and we want to find out what the problem is, something that we often do is basically we can collect samples from the good areas and bad areas and basically see what the difference is and figure out what's the limiting nutrient in that situation. So that's when we're doing diagnostics. In that particular case, the plant part that we are collecting is less relevant. We basically have flexibility. What we want is really just to compare the plants and find out what the potential limitation is. Now, in the second case, where we are doing monitoring and comparing these values to what we will call sufficiency ranges, we're trying to basically see if the levels are in the optimum range. In the monitoring case, in that case, it's very important to follow guidelines for proper sampling. In the case of corn, for example, we are talking small corn, less than 12-inch tall. We typically, the guidelines is to collect the whole plant and send those to the labs. Once we have corn that is tasseling, we have we can identify the ear leaf, then get into that reproductive stage, which a lot of the corn in the States get into that point in some cases. Then we basically want to collect specifically the ear leaf in corn and send those to the labs. Now, why is it important that we collect those specific plant parts depending on the growth stage? It's because we are comparing these numbers to what essentially book values where we do have these normal sufficiency ranges. And so, again, those are developed based on a database of sampling that we've done in the past, which are typically, again, targeting specific plant parts. And again, one of the things that is important to keep in mind here, and perhaps is one of the key aspects of tissue analysis, is that nutrient concentration in the plant, in the whole plant, will vary a little bit. If you are collecting the upper leaves or the lower leaves, the actual concentration of nutrients will be different. So this is the main reason why we need to follow these guidelines very closely. Obviously, stay in communication with your agronomist. The soil testing lab is doing this analysis and find out what's the proper guidelines. In addition to this, it's also very important to communicate to the lab what is the growth stage of that particular crop and what is the plant part that you're sending out to the lab. In that way, you can get the accurate interpretations of those numbers.
Are there some things that could maybe throw off the results of the analysis?
Yes, this is also another key aspects of tissue analysis, and it's sometimes one of the limitations is that if we think about tissue analysis, it's basically telling you exactly how much nutrient is in that plant. The reason for different concentrations in the plant could be many. Obviously, one reason for a deficiency in the tissue could be because we have low nutrient content in the soil, which is the obvious, but it may not be always the reason for that. For example, we do have cases where tissue analysis is coming back low in certain nutrients, but then we follow up with soil tests and the nutrient level in the soil is actually okay. But perhaps we have other issues like compaction, for example, that limiting root growth and obviously the uptake of nutrients. In some cases, for example, we do have low pH where, again, the roots are basically affected. They are not taking up those nutrients, and that's basically show up in that tissue analysis. So, again, thinking about this, tissue analysis is telling us exactly what's in the tissue, what's in the plant, but not necessarily know why maybe some of those nutrients are perhaps a little bit off. So this brings another key point, which is really, again, still the value of soil testing. And especially if we are thinking about the diagnostic use of tissue analysis, if we do have some yellowing in the field, we want to find out what it is. Tissue analysis is one tool, but ideally that needs to go also with a soil test to really find out what is the limitation in the soil. That will give us the full picture of what's happening. Again, if, let's say, for example, we do have low phosphorus in the tissue, but again, soil test is showing that phosphorus levels in the soil are okay, perhaps the limitation is soil pH. And again, that's give us the full information really of what's the problem may be. And again, this is especially the case for diagnostics, where we're trying to figure out what's going on in that particular field. Again, complementing information with soil tests still has a lot of value.
When it comes to sending samples to the K-State testing lab, how do producers need to do that?
Yes, handling the sample and obviously submitting the sample is another step that is very important. Submitting to the K-State soil testing lab or any other lab for that matter. There are some guidelines. We always recommend that samples we basically send it in paper bags rather than plastic, because if we do send it in plastic, we do have moisture accumulating, and obviously that can decompose by the time it gets to the lab, and the quality of that sample is no longer good. So really, what we will do in the lab, if we have a tissue sample, is that we'll basically dry that sample and grind it before we do the analysis. So if you think about that, really anything you can do to basically dry that sample before you send it, or use paper bags so the samples basically start to dry out as it gets to the lab is a key aspect. Again, for sure, try to avoid using plastic bags for tissue samples.
Dorivar, as people kind of get numbers and the analysis back from the lab, how can the range be affected and why those numbers might be different?
Yes, there are things that we talk about, obviously, limitations in maybe affecting plant uptake. But one key aspect also is the growth stage of the plant, especially as we're getting to reproductive stage. And this is very important for corn, but even more important actually for soybean, for example, where once we have grain and seeds forming, basically, if you think about this, the plant is going to be remobilizing basically all the nutrients in the leaves, in the stalks, and basically putting into that seed formation. So that's the whole effort of that plant. And so it's not uncommon that we may actually see some levels of nutrients that may be a little bit on the lower range, especially in high yield environments, and especially as we're getting to the more advanced reproductive stage, some of those values may end up being a little low. This is important to mention because just because some of the values are coming slightly lower doesn't mean that we do have a deficiency issue. It's giving us some information that maybe we need to follow up. But again, it's maybe just resulting from good yieldings, crops, remobilizing nutrient to seeds, and maybe the reason why we're seeing some of those low values. So again, may not be necessarily a deficiency. We basically give us the opportunity to follow up.
And Dorivar, before we cut to our break, wanting to make a quick mention of a CCA training that's coming up here at K-State.
Yes, we are getting ready to basically have our Certified Crop Advisor Field Diagnostic School in July. That's basically in July 9 to 10 and one session. And then the second session is 11-12 that same week. And so that's in Manhattan, in the agronomy farm. And we try to do this very hands-on discussion with agronomists and extension. And again, obviously, audience is invited to participate on this event. You can find out more from Kansas State Extension, and this is in collaboration also with KARA, Kansas Agrobusiness Retailers Association, and K-State Agronomy. And so it's a joint effort, and again, it's always a great event to discuss some of these topics, for example, on fertility, but we also have other topics relevant in agronomy, of course.
Dorivar, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you.
That was K-State Soil Fertility Specialist Dorivar Ruiz Diaz. In today's show notes on agtoday.net, I will put a link where you can learn more about this plant analysis, and also a link if you'd like to learn more about these upcoming field days with the CCA training. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we have more for you ahead.
You're tuned back into Agriculture Today. We continue the show by discussing how producers can better represent agriculture at farmers markets with former K-State Extension agent and owner of Brunkow Family Lamb, Glenn Brunkow. Glenn, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Glenn, to start off our conversation, would you say consumers have become more informed or less informed about agriculture in recent times?
It's kind of a mixed bag. They're more informed, but oftentimes I'm finding that the information they're getting isn't completely correct. We all know what kind of a source the internet can be. It can be good and it can be bad, and I encounter both when I run into consumers.
Where do the most direct interactions occur between producers and consumers?
Well, with me, it's the county farm or the farmers markets. We do 2 farmers markets, one in Wamego and one in Manhattan, and those days are 3 or 4 hours of direct contact with consumers.
Why are these interactions so important to the public's perception of agriculture?
It's a great way for consumers to meet us, to understand. We get to talk a little bit about our operations and answer any questions that they might have, take care of any fears they might have. It's just a great way. They get to know you, especially repeat customers. You get to be a resource for them, a trusted resource.
What are some key messages or things that producers can say to advocate for agriculture in places like farmers markets?
What I find is if I'm honest with the consumer and talk about things like antibiotics and how we use them and withdrawal time and our feeds and why we feed what we do and talk to them a little bit about topics like GMOs and hormones and things like that, and give them the truth, but to also be honest about what we do in our operation. I also find it's a great feedback for me. If I can't explain and I can't describe and feel good about what I'm telling the consumer, then I need to take a deeper look at my operation also. It's a two-way street. We need to tell them, pass along information, but we also need to listen to them.
Another area where the public gets to experience agriculture and livestock are county fairs. What advice would you give to youth on how to be a good ambassador for the industry?
Sure. Think about what I always told my kids to think about what you're doing. Assume that somebody's watching you all the time when you're at a show, and think about what your actions are and how you're treating your animals. Be open for questions. Talk about how our relationship with our vet. Talk about your daily routine with your animals and how much care and time you provide them. I think all of that's important for the consumers to understand how much we care for our livestock and their safety and well-being is critical for us, and that we treat them well while we have them.
To kind of sum up our discussion, Glenn, what are some of the key messages you'd encourage producers to start sharing with local consumers?
We open our farm up. Any of our customers can come out at any time. In fact, when we have baby lambs, we encourage our consumers to come out and watch and see what we're doing. But we're completely open and honest with them. I think we just need to stress what we do, but we also need to let them understand that we're just like they are and develop that relationship. And so there's not a distance. We need to bridge the gap between consumers and producers.
For producers, where should they go to learn more about representing agriculture?
Any of the, of course, I'm affiliated with Farm Bureau, and we have several great programs where you can learn about advocacy for agriculture and practice it. I don't think there's a whole lot you learn, but practicing that is so important. You need to be able to tell your story, and that comes with telling it over and over. NCBA, there are a multitude of different places that you can get practical information on how to advocate for agriculture and how to be a voice for agriculture.
That was former K-State Extension agent and owner of Brunkow Family Lamb, Glenn Brunkow, on educating local consumers about agriculture. I'm Jacob Cloughton for Shelby Varner, and that's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.